Hospital are deserted amid fear of a continuing crackdown. Now, in Mexico, 2 people were killed in a drive-by shooting in the resort city of Mazatlan, the attack taking place in a hotel car park. Many other foreign tourists were in the area when it took place, and as a consequence, several cruise ship companies say they are cancelling their stopovers in that city. We will finish our bulletin there, but you can keep up to date on everything that's going on in Libya, around the region, and of course in the rest of the world news. You'll find everything at aljazeera.net/English. We've got live blogs from our correspondents in and around the Middle East, focusing on what's happening in Libya, as well as commentary from some fairly high-profile and well-informed individuals. All the latest details, aljazeera.net/English. That's it for the moment. We'll be back with more news after Riz Khan.
Hello and welcome. Seen as a threat to many Arab regimes, artists and intellectuals were often repressed. So what role can they play now as the landscape changes through popular uprisings? Many of those challenging their long-standing authoritarian regimes say they've been inspired by the literature of protest through the years. From Latin America to the Arab world, writers and thinkers have faced persecution and even death for daring to speak out against totalitarian rule, but their persistence has served as an example for those seeking change. So today we ask, what is the political power of literature and what role do writers and artists have in social revolutions? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. Send an SMS or an email, and we'll also welcome your phone calls onto the show. Joining me now from London is Libyan writer Hisham Matter, who spent his early childhood in Tripoli until his family were forced to flee the Gaddafi regime. In 1990, his father, a political dissident, was kidnapped in Cairo and remains missing to this day. His book, In the Country of Men, tells the story of Colonel Gaddafi's 1969 September Revolution through the eyes of a 9-year-old boy. Also with us is internationally acclaimed Egyptian writer Adhaf Souef. She has recently returned to London after participating in the Tahrir Square protests in Egypt. Her book, The Map of Love, traces modern Egyptian history. And from Durham in North Carolina, we're joined by world-renowned Chilean writer Ariel Dorfman. In the 1960s, he took part in the social revolutions that swept Latin America, and he worked as a cultural advisor to Chilean President Salvador Allende. Professor Dorfman was forced into exile during the authoritarian Pinochet regime. His play, Death and the Maiden, about torture and disappearance, has been staged around the world. I thank you all for being on the show. And Hisham Matter, actually, I'd like to start with you, if I may, and ask, considering how the Gaddafi regime has affected your family, how do you regard what's going on in Libya and what might really change there when it comes to the social landscape?
Well, what's going on in Libya right now is extraordinary, because the Libyan dictatorship has been exceptionally violent and oppressive. Cultural life in Libya under Gaddafi has been all but decimated. And obviously, witnessing this uprising, I'm more concerned right now with the loss of life and with the vulnerability that Libyan society finds itself in. But also, I'm also excited, if that's the right word, about the future, hopeful about the future.
Let me ask you, do you feel,
it seems that
do you feel that there will really be a change in the way people can express themselves? Do you really feel, I mean, no one really knows what's going to happen next. Do you feel there will be greater freedom of expression?
Well, I think so, because I think the most significant thing that has happened in these last few weeks, not only in Libya, obviously, but also in Tunisia and in Egypt, hasn't been what people have focused on, which is the toppling of, long-standing, incredibly violent, oppressive dictatorships, although that's, of course, an incredibly significant event. I think what has been more significant is that I get the sense that people in Tunisia and in Egypt and now in Libya are rediscovering what it means to be a people. They're rediscovering their national identity, the sense of themselves. certain kind of regaining of a sort of pride and sense of what it means to live in a metropolis. And so I think inevitably that's going to make cultural life more vibrant and more rich.
Let me bring in Adaf Soef and ask, when you were in Egypt recently and you were there taking part in the protest in Tahrir Square against the Egyptian President Mubarak's regime, what sense did you get of what people wanted? I mean, of course, people are very concerned about the economic disparity in a place like Egypt, but how high on the list of priorities was, for example, the freedom of expression and the chance to change some cultural norms?
Well, I agree completely with what Hisham has just said. What I saw happening was exactly a people rediscovering themselves, rediscovering what it meant to be Egyptian and celebrating that. And over the 3 weeks, Tahrir Square very, very quickly became the civic space that we all long for and that we all feel that we deserve. And this was manifested in all sorts of ways, including that it was this great burst of creative energy, which showed itself in people creating art. There was street art, there were stand-up comics, there were, of course, all the slogans and the placards that people were inventing and carrying around. There were the jokes, there were the songs, the chants. There was a huge burst of expression, which was creative, innovative, humorous, and that people were celebrating as it was happening. They were discovering what it was like.
Right. I wonder
to
then
be able to speak.
Hadaf, I wonder if then that rich cultural heritage that Egypt had has not been crushed or destroyed over time. Then is it still, you still feel it's vibrant?
Well, you know what? For years, I and many others have been holding on to a position that looked impossibly romantic, which basically can be summarized as: we have developed an Egyptian character over 7,000 years. The fact that it has been so sort of rubbished for 40 years can't matter. It is there somewhere. And at some point, we're going to shake off all this dust and debris and it will shine forth again. And this is what happened in this revolution.
Now, Ariel Dorfman, it's great to have you on the show as well. A pleasure and honor that you could join us, sir. And I wonder, it's not only in the Middle East that writers and intellectuals and artists have felt the heavy hand of oppression by authoritarian regimes. And I wonder, it's happened all over the world. How do you compare the situation that you're seeing in the turbulent countries of the Arab world right now with what you witnessed yourself in your home country, Chile, where, of course, you eventually had to flee into exile because of the Pinochet regime?
The first thing that you feel is this enormous joy to see that the Egyptians and the Tunisians and the Libyans are Chileans as well. And I think the extraordinary thing that you're hearing here is voice. There are many voices that were there, but they were suppressed. They weren't finding each other. Now they're able to echo. Now they're able to go forth. In my case, I lived 3 very different experiences. I lived a revolution with Salvador Allende for 3 years. I lived 17 years of oppression and persecution under the dictatorship. And then I lived what now the Egyptians and the Tunisians and others are starting to look at, which is the transition to democracy, which is the most complicated of all these.